Picture a modern roof. Hard tiles, steep rafters, sealed ceilings. Now place 4 men above a crowded room in Capernaum. Mark says they could not reach Jesus through the doorway, so they approached the building from an entirely different direction. They climbed above him, opened the roof where he was, and lowered a man who could not walk. But what, physically, did they remove? Mark uses 2 forceful verbs. They unroofed the roof, then dug through. Luke retells the scene with another detail, saying they lowered the man through the roofing material, often translated as tiles. That difference matters because Galilean houses did not all carry one standardized roof assembled from a single universal recipe. Excavations can show us basalt walls, courtyards, thresholds, stairs, ovens, and room plans. Roofs usually disappeared long ago. So the task is not to rebuild one proven house, but to test a plausible reconstruction against text and archaeology. We will follow the bearers from street to roof, layer by layer, then ask what the architecture adds to Mark's scene. The result is less like breaking through modern shingles and more like opening a worked surface above a living room. Mark 2:12 begins by saying, Jesus returned to Capernaum after some days. News spread that he was in a house, and the report quickly drew more people than the available domestic space could hold. This sets the investigation inside an ordinary dwelling. Some translations render the phrase as, at home. The Greek permits that sense, but Mark never identifies an owner, an address, or a specific excavated building that viewers could visit today. The location remains narratively specific, but archaeologically anonymous. People gathered so densely that there was no remaining space, Mark says, not even around the doorway. The description establishes a practical obstacle before any theological dispute enters the scene. Architecture enters the story before controversy does. Mark 2:3 says 4 people arrived carrying a man on a simple sleeping mat or pallet. Mark names the number of carriers, but gives no names, relationships, journey distance, or medical history. Even the man's condition is described without modern diagnosis. The obstacle was not a locked gate or hostile guard. It was the audience already pressing close to hear Jesus, occupying the ordinary route by which a carried person could enter. Human density, not distance alone, created the blockage. Mark reports no negotiation with the crowd and no attempt to force through it. The carriers could not bring the man near Jesus, so the narration abruptly redirects our attention upward. That turn supplies the scene's central physical puzzle. In Mark 2:4, the sequence is compact and physical. They removed the roof above Jesus, dug through the material, and lowered the pallet on which the man lay into the room below. Every action changes the building's use in sequence. The first verb, apostegazzo, is rare in the New Testament. Standard lexicons understand it here as uncovering or removing roofing, a straightforward description rather than a specialized ritual term. The lexical point is modest but architecturally important. The second verb, exorizo, normally carries the idea of digging out or digging through. Mark therefore pictures material being worked loose, not a convenient trap door simply being opened. The image is labor, resistance, and material removal. Neither verb contains a coded theological message. Their importance is practical. The surface resisted them, effort was required, and an opening did not exist until the carriers made one. The words describe work, not a hidden doctrine. Luke 5:17-26 tells the same episode with Pharisees and teachers of the law present, while visitors have come from villages of Galilee, Judea, and Jerusalem. His broader audience emphasizes the episode's public character more clearly. In Luke 5:19, the bearers went up onto the roof and lowered the man through the keramos into the middle, directly before Jesus. His wording sharpens the spatial arrangement. The destination is not merely indoors, but centrally visible. Keramos can denote clay, pottery, or a ceramic roofing element. Many English versions choose tiles, creating a more specific architectural image than Mark's account by itself supplies. That translation should be treated as possible, not automatic. Scholars therefore offer several responsible options. Actual clay roofing pieces, hardened earthen roofing described with a familiar term, or Luke adapting the scene for readers accustomed to tiled roofs. None can be proved from Luke's noun alone. The precise surface remains debated. What both accounts firmly share is ascent, an opened roof, controlled lowering, and the man's arrival in front of Jesus rather than at a distant edge. This shared core should govern any visual reconstruction. Mark 2:5 then says Jesus saw their faith. The plural naturally includes the visible action of the carriers, though the sentence does not invite us to calculate each person's private belief. Mark emphasizes observable persistence rather than psychological analysis. In Mark 2:5-7, the first words addressed to the man concern forgiveness, provoking silent objections among some scribes seated inside. Mark shifts from an architectural problem to a dispute over authority. The room becomes a forum for competing claims. In Mark 2:8-12, Jesus responds publicly, commands the man to rise, take his mat, and go home, and the man does so immediately. The physical result becomes visible to everyone present. The command creates a test that witnesses can assess. Mark 2:12 makes the final movement matter. The pallet that entered from above exits through the gathered people, now carried by its former occupant, rather than supporting his motionless body. The route downward is answered by a route outward. To understand how the opening could be made, we leave the room briefly and place this unnamed house within the material landscape of first-century Capernaum. Geography and construction now become interpretive tools for us. Capernaum stood on the northwestern shore of the Sea of Galilee, close to fishing grounds and routes linking lakeside communities. The Gospels repeatedly place Jesus there, but Mark does not identify this house. The lakeshore setting also explains the prominence of local basalt. It was not built like monumental Rome or an elite Mediterranean villa. Excavated residential areas show comparatively modest buildings organized in clusters beside narrow streets, lanes, and shared points of access. Domestic circulation mattered more here than monumental display. Local geology shaped construction. Builders used abundant dark basalt, the volcanic stone that still defines many excavated walls. Its rough texture and irregular shapes affected wall thickness, openings, and room proportions. These are material constraints, not decorative background. Excavated compounds contain small rooms arranged around one or more open courtyards, often sharing walls and circulation within a larger block. Archaeologists commonly call such a block an insula. The term describes an urban block, not one family. These plans may reflect extended households, multiple families, workshops, or arrangements that changed over generations. Stone outlines survive, but the identities and daily relationships of the occupants are much harder to recover. Household archaeology must therefore remain cautious about social labels. Courtyards provided daylight, workspace, cooking areas, and movement between rooms. They also made a house a sequence of thresholds, with public street, shared court, and more enclosed spaces. Movement through the courtyard shaped access to every room. Stone walls, thresholds, and floors survive because they are durable. Timber beams, reeds, brush, cordage, and earthen roof layers usually decay, burn, collapse, or get reused elsewhere. This preservation bias is crucial when discussing ancient roofs. One famous compound beneath later Christian buildings is traditionally associated with Peter. Its long history is important, but the identification remains debated and cannot securely locate the event in Mark 2. Tradition and excavation must be kept carefully distinct. Later veneration demonstrates that Christians attached memory to a particular place in Capernaum. It does not establish that this healing occurred in that room, or even in that compound. Memory is evidence of remembrance, not automatic identification. We therefore cannot name the homeowner, choose an exact excavated floor plan, or calculate the opening's dimensions. The archaeological contribution is a range of domestic possibilities, not a recovered crime scene. Responsible reconstruction begins by accepting those limits. From that range, we can build a cautious working model. Each layer will be marked as excavation, strong inference, or plausible reconstruction, so the picture remains useful without becoming falsely precise. We are building a model, not claiming discovery. Begin with basalt walls, irregular fieldstones stacked in courses, stabilized with smaller stones and earthen bonding, rather than the finely cut masonry familiar from grand public architecture. The result was sturdy, rough, and locally economical. Such construction favored manageable spans. Shorter rooms could be covered with available timbers more easily than broad halls, which fits the compact interior spaces found in many domestic remains. Roof design followed the practical limits of available materials. Now place an open courtyard beside several rooms. Doorways facing inward connect cooking, storage, craft, and sleeping areas without requiring every chamber to open directly onto the street. This inward orientation made the courtyard the domestic hub. A street entrance could therefore become a narrow funnel. Once listeners filled it and pressed around the threshold, the normal approach to an interior gathering space effectively disappeared. Mark's doorway detail fits that kind of restricted access. Inside, people might occupy a courtyard, adjoining rooms, and the edges of doorways. Mark gives us crowding and a blocked entrance, but not an exact seating diagram. Any more precise arrangement would be an artistic choice. Across the top of a covered room, builders could lay timber beams from wall to wall. The spacing depended on timber strength, room width, and the roofing materials available. Major beams carried the load across the room. Over those beams, branches, brush, or reeds could form a woven or layered bed. This lighter framework supported the upper coating and reduced the amount of heavy earth needed. The roof's lighter layers rested on this secondary framework. Above that support came packed earth, clay-rich material, or plastered layers, compressed and maintained to shed water while creating a flat surface sturdy enough for ordinary access. Flat did not mean weightless, permanent, or maintenance-free. This layered roof is a common reconstruction, supported by regional building traditions and experimental restorations. Yet the organic components have not survived above the unnamed house in Mark's account. The model explains possibility without proving one exact roof. A surface of packed material required upkeep. Heat opened cracks, rain tested weak places, and households could renew, smooth, or compact the upper layer as seasons demanded. Roof care belonged to the ordinary rhythm of household labor. That maintenance helps explain why Mark's language of uncovering and digging is physically coherent. A worked earthen surface could be opened piece by piece without demolishing the entire building. The text's verbs match that kind of layered construction. Still, we should not turn one reconstruction into a universal blueprint. Wealth, room span, timber supply, local technique, repairs, and additions produced real variation among Galilean houses. Archaeological ranges should remain ranges, not rigid formulas. Luke's word keramos keeps another possibility visible. Ceramic roofing existed in the wider Mediterranean world, although scholars debate how commonly roof tiles appeared on modest Galilean village houses. The disagreement concerns frequency, not the existence of ceramics. Whether Luke envisioned tiles, hardened clay roofing, or used a familiar literary term, his account does not cancel Mark's verbs. Both narrators describe deliberate access through the roof. The two accounts overlap more than they conflict. How did the carriers reach the top? Excavated stairs, architectural parallels, and later regional practice allow several possibilities. Permanent steps, an exterior stair, a ladder, or access from an adjoining level. The narrative treats roof access as available without pausing to explain it. No verse specifies their route. A courtyard staircase works with some excavated plans. An exterior ascent or neighboring roof works with others. Certainty would exceed the evidence. The route is reconstructible only as a set of options. 4 carriers could keep the pallet comparatively level by supporting its corners while moving through a lane, courtyard, stair, or adjacent rooftop. The text confirms teamwork, not their exact choreography. The same 4-person arrangement also distributes the carried weight. Once above the correct room, they still had to locate Jesus below. Mark identifies the target only as the place where he was, leaving their method of orientation unstated. The text confirms placement, not the means of finding it. They might have followed voices, observed the gathering from a courtyard edge, or received signals from below. Each is possible, but none should be narrated as a recovered fact. Visualizations should label such details as plausible additions. The roof surface would first be scraped, lifted, or broken away within a limited area. That action would expose the lighter supporting layer beneath the compacted outer coating. This is the stage most directly suggested by unroofed. Next, branches, reeds, or similar infill between major supports could be removed. A cautious reconstruction avoids cutting load-bearing beams unless the spacing made that absolutely necessary. The goal was an opening between supports, not structural collapse. If careful reconstructions like this help you see biblical scenes without confusing possibility with proof, subscribe to World Behind the Verse. Now we return directly to Mark's opening. Careful uncertainty is part of the evidence, not a weakness. Mark gives no dimensions, tools, falling debris, weather, repair cost, or homeowner's reaction. Those details can animate a painting, but they must remain visual possibilities rather than narrated evidence. Mark's silence limits both dramatic embellishment and confident engineering. The opening only needed to accommodate the pallet and the man's body. Its precise shape would depend on beam spacing, roof thickness, and how flexible the carrying mat was. We can estimate function, but not recover a measurement. To lower him safely, the carriers needed controlled support, perhaps ropes, straps, or bindings attached to the mat. The Gospel records the lowering, but names no equipment. Controlled descent is certain, the mechanism remains inferred. What Mark does name is the result. The pallet descends into the occupied space, and the man arrives before Jesus. The architecture has delivered him past the blocked threshold. The vertical route has now succeeded where the doorway failed. In a cutaway, the decisive geometry becomes clear. The doorway lies horizontally beyond a dense crowd, while the opened roof creates a shorter vertical route into the room. The cutaway turns narrative sequence into visible spatial logic. Architecture therefore turns the crowd from background scenery into a physical barrier. The listeners surround access to Jesus, even while gathering for the purpose of hearing him. Their presence unintentionally blocks the person needing access. The 4 respond by treating the building itself as a route. Their persistence becomes materially visible through disturbed roofing, an exposed opening, and the controlled descent of the pallet. Faith appears here as coordinated public material action. This does not make property damage the lesson of the passage. Mark offers no general approval of destruction, no dispute with an owner, and no moral commentary about repairs. The narrator simply moves forward to Jesus' response. Instead, the house concentrates the narrative. A domestic interior becomes publicly contested space, the roof opens above it, and everyone present can witness the words and actions that follow. Architecture makes the coming dispute visible to a shared audience. The scribes are seated, Mark notes, but we cannot map their chairs, social rank, or exact position. The narrative point is that informed critics are present within the audience. Their seated posture contrasts with the man who will rise. They question Jesus' authority to forgive sins. Jesus answers by connecting an invisible pronouncement with an observable command, whose result the whole crowded household can evaluate. The room now contains both claim and verification. The man rises, lifts the same mat that had carried him, and moves outward. An object associated with dependence becomes the visible evidence that he can now carry. The reversal is concrete enough for every observer to understand. Mark says he went out before them all. The healing is not hidden upstairs, screened from critics, or reported later by a private witness. His departure crosses the same human barrier that stopped him. Return to Mark's wording, and the modern steep tiled roof loses its control over the imagination. We see an accessible surface assembled from workable layers above supporting beams. It is a roof that can be reached, worked, and repaired. That reconstruction remains plausible rather than certain. Luke preserves a roofing term that may suggest ceramic material, and actual domestic buildings varied by resources, design, and repair history. Confidence belongs to the shared pattern, not every component. What remains firm is the narrative engineering. 4 carriers overcome a crowded threshold by opening the roof directly above Jesus and lowering the man into public view. The route is unconventional, but the sequence is explicit. So which detail now seems most important? The accessible roof, the blocked doorway, or the public exit with the mat? Subscribe for more evidence-led journeys behind the verse. Your answer reveals which piece of evidence reshaped the scene.